So this is, I'll introduce, the group, but before I do that, I just want to share a little bit about, oh, thank you, Pat. You can hear us. Okay. How this came about to be. So thank you for spending the evening with us. This is a much needed and important conversation. Um, we all have, someone that we love that may be aging, or we're considering different options. So several months ago, the three of us, myself, Connie, and Megan, along with two other professionals, held an in-person panel actually that was a 360, right? So we had a therapist, an elder care attorney, and it was very well received. And people felt like this was information that, took them a lot of time and energy and resources to find in one place. From that, what we learned is it might be helpful to kind of deep dive into each of the professionals and really have an in-depth conversation. So we've been having these sandwich generation series. 2 months ago in October, we had an estate planning series that was packed with information, very well attended. Today, we're going to talk about in-home care. I'll introduce Megan a little bit later. And then in a couple months, we'll talk about placement when home is no longer safe. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But for now, I'd just like to introduce the what we call the Care Collective. It's the three of us, myself, Connie, and Megan, coming together to offer this for you guys. Connie will introduce herself in a little bit, but a little bit about myself for those who don't know me. My name is Tez Roro. I'm a real estate broker and instructor here in New Jersey. I'm a certified real estate specialist. So that just means that my work focuses on helping older adults and their families navigate housing decisions with clarity, dignity, and a lot less overwhelmed because typically helping seniors in the sandwich generation has a lot of memories and emotional attachments with it. As part of this care collaborative, because I truly believe families are the best supported when trusted professionals work together, whether it's housing, care, or planning. The next chapter, my role is to help connect the dots so that no one feels like they're making these decisions alone, because it is often overwhelming. I'm really glad that you're here and that we get to have this conversation together. At this point, I'd like to invite Connie to introduce herself.
Thank you, Tez. Thank you very much. So, welcome everyone to part two of our series. So, I am Connie Pizarro. I'm the owner and CEO of Oasis Senior Advisors Central Jersey. And what we do is we work with seniors and their families to help them find assisted living and memory care communities when they're no longer safe at home. So I am also a certified dementia practitioner. We specialize, as I said, in placement. However, we do work to connect seniors to services that they may need. Services such as working with Tez as a realtor to help them to sell their home when they're moving out, or with an elder law attorney, as we had in part one of our series, when we need to get legal documents in order. And as tonight, we're going to be talking about home care. So we also connect them with home care. So we like to think at Oasis Senior Advisors that you can make one call and get many solutions. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Tez.
Thank you, Connie. Connie is truly a professional in her space, and a lot of people think of her when, like her tagline, I still remember it, when home is no longer safe, right? At this point, I'd like to introduce Megan Scott, who is the third person of in this trio. Megan has led Right at Home of Essex County as the owner and operator for almost 10 years, guiding a dedicated team committed to delivering compassionate, high quality care that helps seniors live safely and comfortably at home. For Megan, this work is deeply personal. Home care is part of her family legacy. She proudly carries forward the mission of her late father, Moses Scott. He started this business in 2004 to provide reliable, heartfelt support to older adults in the community after his own mother lived with and eventually succumbed to Alzheimer's disease. Recognized for her warm and dependable leadership, Megan remains actively engaged in the community and continually seeks the best resources for local seniors and their families. She also volunteers with the Alzheimer's Association, advocating for greater awareness, support, and education surrounding dementia care. I'll also add, take a personal privilege here. Megan and her company was also recently acknowledged as Business of the Year by the West Orange Chamber of Commerce. Megan, take it away. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I give it up to Megan, I just want to mention sort of some housekeeping rules. So keep it on mute until we get to Q&A. If there's a question that comes up for you as Megan is talking, feel free to drop it in the chat. If we're able to answer, we will. If not, we'll definitely bring it up during the Q&A. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Tez. And we'll mention also that this is being recorded. So if someone was not able to join, we will follow up with the link so that you can share it out afterwards as well. So thank you, Tez, and thank you, Connie. I'll start off by saying, Connie, Tez, and I are here today because many of you are in the sandwich generation, which is caring for children while also worrying about an aging loved one. Some of you actually probably thought that you would never be here and this wouldn't be reality, but here we are. As you know, it's an incredibly difficult time to navigate, and our goal is really to be here to help you through the process. And if you're not technically in the sandwich generation, that's okay too. You might be juggling a career or personal relationships while supporting your aging loved one. The idea is all the same. And it's the fact that we're all pulled in so many different directions. So, Connie, Tez, and I are really here to try to show you where to start. So let's dive in. I want to make it clear that, yes, I own a home care agency, but this is not going to be a sales pitch for Right at Home of Essex County. This is really an explanation of in-home care so that you can decide if it's for you and exactly how you want to go about it. And of course, while I'm a firm believer that home care is an amazing resource, you may be surprised to hear that I actually don't think home care is for everyone. In fact, I know it's not for everyone. I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. My own grandmother actually had a wonderful caregiver who became like family until she passed away. So that was a great example of it working. But, as you'll come to see, it's really not the perfect fit for every situation. I'll explain more a little bit about that shortly. So first, understanding home care and the types of services that home care offers. So home care is personalized in-home support for a loved one wherever home may be. And that support could be hands-on or hands-off. It truly is customized based on whatever it is the need is. Hands-on support, of course, can look like dressing or bathing or toileting, assistance moving around, whereas hands-off support can simply be structure, routine, or companionship. Regardless of what the care exactly looks like, the goal is really the same. And that goal is to help individuals to maintain independence, safety, and longevity in the home. It really helps to afford the opportunity for someone to stay in their home or in their house, along a loved one, or alone, depending on what the situation is. And of course, lastly, home care is a peace of mind. It's another set of eyes, ears, and hands when you actually can't be there. Or maybe you can be there, but you're not comfortable with the role of caretaker, and that is also very much okay. Because being a caretaker is a really big job, and it tends to change the dynamic of the relationship. So home care can also be there to help kind of preserve some of those relationships. So what home care is not. There's a lot of confusion between the terms home care and home health care, understandably so. I mean, they sound almost exactly the same. We get calls often in our office saying, I'm looking for home health care. And I say, that's great. But we are a home care agency, not a home health care agency. So it's a distinction that we have to make a lot. Oftentimes, too, people use the terms interchangeably. So they might mean home care, but they actually, are saying home health care or vice versa. So home health care is usually short-term or goal-focused. So think maybe, a nurse stopping by your house a few times a week to check on a wound after a hospitalization, or a physical therapist continuing the work that you were doing since you just got out of rehab after a fall. And so home health usually comes by way of doctor's orders, and it's technically recovery from illness, injury, or surgery. Home health is great and often a very necessary supplement to home care, but it's not home care. Home care also isn't, 24-hour emergency response. Yes, of course, you can call my office 24 hours a day and someone will answer the phone, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be able to take immediate action at 2 in the morning. when an emergency comes up, it's always still best to contact, emergency services, and not hope that you can kind of put a Band-Aid on it until the morning rolls around. Home care is, of course, also not, a replacement for family involvement. It's not a replacement for assisted living. It's not a replacement for a nursing home, but it can certainly be a supplement to all of those things. And lastly, home care is not a cleaning service. It's not a taxi service, and it's not pet care, unfortunately. I'm sorry. There are elements of what we do that incorporate a little bit of cleaning, a little bit of driving, but it's usually not, the main purpose or the main goal of the care. So diving in a little bit more to some of the services offered by home care agency. So of course there's personal care, like we mentioned, the bathing, the dressing, the grooming, the transferring, the feeding, safety supervision, safe ambulation, all of that falls under personal care. Companionship and supervision. Companionship is a wonderful thing. It's very possible for a home health aide to develop a significant, really special bond with a client, and we do see it happen a lot of the time. Companionship is often part of the job. And in fact, after seeing a need for the increase in companionship, we actually developed a program that focuses solely on companionship for those who don't need as long of visits. And these companionship type visits are often focused on doing something fun, enjoying an activity, or having conversation. But all of this, just know, is possible under home care. Light housekeeping and meal preparation, of course, those are two significant parts of home care. Transportation and errands. I'll say that transportation and errands whenever possible, right? So not all caregivers drive, but it is possible for someone to drive depending on what you're looking for. A lot of people will call and ask us for transportation, but then we come to find out that it's really very occasional that mom or dad has to go anywhere. So in that case, if your transportation needs are minimal, I would suggest using like an Uber or a Lyft or, other transportation services to get around, and not making the main focus of the caregiver selection be whether or not this person has a vehicle. So just something to keep in mind. Respite care for family caregivers is absolutely a big part of what home care is. This could be respite care overnight. It could be respite care on a weekend. It could be respite care because you take care of your mom most of the time and you want to be able to go away for a week. But supporting the family structure and just helping to keep in place what you have there is another important part of what we do. And of course, specialty care. There's an unfortunate amount of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, adults with disabilities, chronic conditions. But we do support all of those things, and the caregivers are often very skilled in doing so. And lastly, home care can be short or long term. I always explain that there is no commitment to working with us for any length of time. Like we talked about with respite, if you just need a weekend away, then we'll give you a weekend away. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that extends over a long period of time unless that's what you need. So who can benefit from home care? Here are a few common situations where home care can really help. So we see a lot of people contact us, recovery after a hospitalization, a surgery, or an illness. Of course, hips, right? We see a lot of hip surgeries. We see a lot of knee surgeries. Think about anything that if you are to transition home and you're still sore and recovering, you're not going to be able to do your activities of daily living without support. So oftentimes people need to call in a caregiver to really assist during these times. And again, oftentimes that is short-term care, especially with the hips. It doesn't seem to last too long these days. And of course, speaking of illness, this time of year, you see a lot of illness. If your older loved one is hospitalized with flu or respiratory disease, they can certainly recover in the hospital, and they no longer have the diagnosis, but there's a good chance when they come home, they still might end up being a little bit weaker. So just something that you want to consider, maybe putting in place some transitional care until they're back to 100%. Chronic conditions, of course, we support in the home. Anyone who's a fall risk or has mobility challenges. If your loved one has had a fall or multiple falls, you should really consider help. Yes, you could have gotten lucky because, mom doesn't fall too hard. She has rugs all over the house. She never hits anything on the way down. All of that is great, and thank goodness for that. But unfortunately, it's not always going to stay that way. So while you're on the road to figuring out why these falls are happening and hopefully remedying that with your doctor, put some home care into place. Temporary relief for family caregivers. We talked a little bit about respite and really just, general concerns about a loved one living alone. If you have a thought in the back of your mind that you think things are changing, mom is not functioning like she used to, dad seems a little bit forgetful, whatever it is. I mean, these are very common situations where people come to us. I also just want to point out, social isolation and loneliness. Unfortunately, both of those things do contribute to memory loss, which you'll see on the point above. Um, when someone is retired for a long time, they don't necessarily have a daily routine. It's really easy to become no longer oriented to time or space. And so when you don't really have an idea of exactly what's going on or what's happening and when, it can lead to a bit of cognitive decline. So if you have a loved one who's starting to get lonely, consider putting some structure into place for that person, whether that be from home care, maybe an adult day program or something along those lines. But just know being lonely can in fact impact health. So, like I said, home care is not always the best fit. And, just quickly, a couple of examples of when it might not be. So if an individual has intensive medical or memory care needs and requires around-the-clock supervision, can home care solve that? Yes, but of course it's cost prohibitive. Around the care can be costly and sometimes it's unsustainable. So it could be a short-term solution, but certainly not a long-term plan. Sometimes an individual is unsafe to remain in the home, even if they do have a caregiver. And I'll say that we see this a lot. The layout of a lot of older homes, especially in this area, I've been inside a lot of them, the layout is often not conducive to aging in place. So unless you're willing and able, let's say, to make significant changes or modifications to the home, it just might not be possible to stay. Maybe mom is on a bedroom on the third floor. Yes, there is a first floor bedroom, but she just doesn't want to stay down there. So what do? Do you help her navigate, 3 flights of stairs every day, or do you consider alternate options because, completely changing the layout of the home might not be doable? Of course, too, there's always downsizing options, getting into an apartment or something similar. But again, it's still not even always safe if you have a person there. And then, of course, we'll get into cost shortly, but you always want to think about what is sustainable and realistic to your family. Some people come to us with timelines thinking, okay, we need to make the money stretch for 1 more year. Surprise, mom lives for longer than 1 more year. Now what do? You really have to consider what can give you longevity because life can be unpredictable. So I'm going to walk you through a few different home care scenarios just to give you an idea of how they might be handled. I'll take a pause too. If you have any thoughts and want to drop them into the chat, please feel free. So the first scenario is we're going to talk about a woman named Mary. Mary is 78 and she's lived in the same little yellow house for almost 50 years. She still loves chatting with neighbors and tending to her rose bushes, but lately her mornings have become a little bit confusing. Her daughter noticed the signs first when Mary started missing doses of medication. Then came a moment where she left a pot on the stove and wandered into the backyard. A few weeks later, Mary backed her car into a mailbox, insisting that she just misjudged the turn. Her family is not ready for a big move. Mary doesn't want to leave her home, but they worry constantly about what might happen when no one is there. Her daughter works as a teacher during the week, but is happy for Mary to stay at her house on the weekends. So, is Mary a good candidate for home care? So I'll tell you, when I think through this scenario, um, immediately I start to think and form the care plan. And that's often what happens during the initial intake conversation. So a few things I hear is that Mary needs medication reminders, she needs companionship, she needs stimulation, and she really needs routine. She might also benefit from meal assistance because it sounds like she can't quite be trusted in the kitchen, but it sounds like she's still okay with her dressing and bathing and her undressing, all of that she can still manage on her own, which is great. So someone like Mary would do really well with a part-time caregiver, perhaps a person who's there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to make sure that she covers off on breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Maybe 6 p.m. is too early for her to have dinner, so they leave a meal on the table for her to have when she's ready. Or perhaps the family says, you know what, we can only do shorter hours. So we suggest doing something from maybe 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And the daughter says, I'm a school teacher. I have time in the evening. I'll stop by and I'll bring mom dinner, or the neighbor could help too. So if you have local support system, and that the person that we're talking about is still in good enough shape to kind of manage certain things on their own, it could be a combination of the two. But regardless, it's always better to start care early. So another example of a potential home care client. So Frank is 84 years old and he's fiercely independent. He's the kind of man who insists on still carrying his own groceries. But after slipping on a basement steps and breaking his hip, everything has changed. When he returned home from the hospital, he was determined to bounce back quickly, but instead he found that even the most simple tasks like getting out of bed, stepping into the shower, walking into the kitchen were frightening and painful. Frank's wife, who has arthritis herself, tries to help, but she can't catch him if he loses his balance. After nearly falling again and just trying to reach the bathroom, the family realized that it's time for support. So, is Frank a good home care candidate? I would say absolutely. He doesn't have any necessarily skilled medical needs anymore, right? He already had the surgery, that part is over, but this is classic ADL support. Someone like Frank could really benefit from care all day and possibly overnight, depending on how often he might go out and get up and go to the bathroom. But if
Hey,
Frank is willing,
Megan,
yeah.
do we want to define ADL?
Oh, sure. ADL is activities of daily living. And that's a big term that you'll hear thrown around when you start to talk about home care. So, like I said, Frank, this is classic ADL support, activities of daily living support. Helping with toileting, helping with dressing, helping with bathing. He would need help with all of those things until he's able to get back up and on his feet. So someone like Frank might start with, let's say, 10 to 12 hours of home care per day, but then cut back as he continues to regain his strength, which is a totally possible thing to do when you do have home care. I would also see this case as something that's short term, hopefully. So as Frank regains his strength, the hours reduce and hope eventually, cut them out completely. And then Frank would know that he could always call us back if he needs help again in the future. And then one last scenario. So let's talk about Robert. Robert is 89 and he lives alone in his home that he built with his late wife. He moves slowly and painfully because of arthritis, and his memory, once sharp, is now drifting. One night, a neighbor found him outside at 3 a.m., confused and shivering, saying that he was just trying to find the bathroom. And 2 weeks later, he fell in the hallway and he couldn't get up for almost an hour. His daughters discovered his bruises, the clutter piling up, and untouched meals that they had prepared. They bring in caregivers, but now Robert needs help with nearly everything: bathing, dressing, toileting, eating, and calming down during moments of dementia agitation. Even with the daytime care, the nights are also starting to get dangerous as well. So, is Robert a good home care candidate? Thinking a little bit about Robert, I would say that he is possibly a good short-term candidate, but to me, it sounds like he would really benefit from a memory care community because they're starting to say things like, this doesn't feel like enough. We're not sure if we can keep him safe at home. And so that's usually when families start to have the conversation about possibly moving into a place like assisted living. So again, like I said, not every case is long-term home care appropriate. Robert would definitely need 24-hour care until he transitions into the right memory care. And that means having coverage in the daytime and the nighttime, alert and awake the entire time to keep eyes on him, especially with that incident where he walked outside at 3 in the morning. You want people who are alert and awake at all times. You might even want the aides to actually transition with him into the community to help him get settled. And then eventually they would take over the care. So making the right decision about home care. First, of course, you have to decide whether or not home care is right for your family and when. You also want to select and hire an agency. And I want to pause there and explain a little bit why we keep talking about agencies. Many of you know, or maybe you don't know, that there's actually a private market for caregivers, and that may or may not work out for some. But I'll tell you the benefits of using an agency are that all of our aides are trained and licensed by the Board of Nursing. We're actually all held to strict standards when it comes to our screening and hiring processes. A lot of the aides who work for us and also other agencies are also very, known within this healthcare network, right? They work for other agencies, assisted livings and nursing homes. So it's usually a safer option to go through an agency. They're all also bonded and insured. And so if anything happens in your home while the caregiver there, it's likely covered by the agency. From a practical standpoint, if you hire a private aide and the person is not available, you might be left with no one. And it's as simple as that. I've seen that happen time and time again. But when you work with an agency, you get a caregiver, and if that caregiver is unavailable for some reason, it's the responsibility of the agency to provide that backup coverage for you. And if there's an agency that tells you that they can't do that, then that's probably not the agency that you want to be working with. Lastly, our aides are supervised. So hiring and managing an aide on your own can be time consuming, and it can be difficult. So hiring an agency does also take that work out of it for you. And just know, we have nurses in the field and other staff in the field that are actually actively supervising what is going on in your loved one's home. They are actually a physical presence in the home. And of course, just keeping an open mind. You might go into this thinking, gosh, my mom will never go for this. Or, there's no chance my mom will get along with any of these aides. And I've heard people say things like, oh gosh, my dad is going to scare them away. I feel so bad for the aides coming into my home. But guess what? Just because they act a certain way with a loved one and a family member doesn't necessarily mean that they might act that way with the aide. So, I always think even if there's a little bit of resistance at the start, it's always worth it to give it a shot if that's what's going to give your loved one the best chance of staying home safely. So what does this process look like? Getting started with home care. So first, make sure that you are comfortable with whatever agency it is that you're working with. You want to do your research. So check out the Google reviews, check out the online presence, ask for references, ask around. I saw someone post the other day in a Facebook group, has anyone ever used such and such agency? And there was a couple of comments and conversations, but that could be a way to go if that's how you choose to get your information. But really taking note of their online presence, their reviews and what it is that they put out there, also the number of years in business, what the ownership looks like, et cetera. All of those things should certainly be researched ahead of time. Then you'll conduct, once you do find and select the agency that you want to work with, conduct an initial phone consultation or an inquiry. I would say that typically this takes, an initial phone call is usually about 20 to 30 minutes because there's a lot of exploring and discovery that needs to be done. You want to go into that phone call with a list of questions to ask the agency when you first reach out. And like I said, budget about 20 to 30 minutes. You don't want to rush because you want to make sure that all of your answers are fully answered, all of your questions are fully answered, and that you feel, really supported. And of course, they are going to ask you questions about your loved one as well. So have that information ready, and be as accurate as you can. Because some people get a little bit nervous. They think that we're judging the responses, or they think that we might be scared to work with your mom because her dementia is pretty progressed. But believe that we've seen and heard it all. We're not scared of any type of diagnosis. It's just that we need the information in order to be able to make sure that we as an agency are a good fit for you. And of course, everything in those conversations is confidential, so you don't have to worry about, anything getting out. Also, when you're getting started, you want to determine who the decision maker in your family is going to be and who is going to be the primary contact. We see a lot of situations where there are several siblings. And so maybe Susie makes the first call, but Sally's actually the power of attorney. So perhaps you might want to consider doing that initial phone call together. And of course, you can always call the agency and say, listen, I have 3 siblings. We would all like to get on a phone call together and talk to you. Can we set up a time? And hopefully they would be accommodating. So you set up the initial phone call, you feel happy with what you hear, you're good with the price, and you decide, okay, we're going to move forward with X agency, and we are going to have, 5 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what happens next? Once you set the schedule, your agency is going to work on caregiver matching. And so this is a process that we go through to essentially figure out which caregiver is going to be the one who's working with you. So in my case, we take our caregiver matching process pretty seriously, and we consider a lot of options before presenting one to you. Some of the things that we're considering, their skill set, their personality, their availability, of course. But there's a lot of factors that we take into consideration before sending someone into your home. And this is why it's so important for you to give, all the information that you have to the agency so that we can try to get this right match. We joke around and say it's kind of like dating, right? It's like matchmaking. All the information that we have goes into these decisions. Does it work out every time? No, it doesn't. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to try again. So if for some reason the caregiver is not the right fit on the first time, you ask the agency to give it another shot, give them feedback, and they will do that for you. And some typical scheduling options, we do hourly care, we do live-in care, overnight care, and weekend care. A lot of agencies do have a minimum number of hours that they ask for, and that's because it's just more difficult to get people to work. You can't really get 1 hour of coverage from a private home care agency. That's likely not going to work out. You're not going to have the consistency that you're hoping for. And you'd be surprised how quick 1 hour goes. So I think if you feel that the minimum is too much for what you need, you really want to talk through what else the agency can do, because you might not be considering that, in those few hours, we can run a load of laundry or put some groceries away, or take a shower. So you obviously want to maximize your time, but do keep in mind that, agencies often set minimum amount of hours, and they do that to help also establish consistency. There's always flexibility as well, as your needs do continue to change. So if you start with one schedule, you can shift to another schedule later down the line. And of course, after you do get the care started, there is ongoing support and communication. So there's ongoing support from the agency. Oftentimes there's going to be a nurse who is assigned to your case. That nurse is going to keep in touch with you and visit in the field often, but then there also is office staff who you can talk to. I always like to figure out with the client what their best form of communication is. I have some clients who love to email, don't like to talk on the phone. I have some clients who only respond to a text. So let the agency know what your preferences are. Are you working every day from 9 to 3 and you can't answer your phone? That's fine. But let us know so that if we have to contact you for any reason, we do that after hours. And you also want to let us know, okay, well, if you're not available, who is the family member who is? And then, of course, like I said, that from the family, the best point of contact and communication and the preferred way to do that, all really important things to cover in those initial conversations. So cost and payment options and ways to pay for home care. So this is a range that I'm giving you based on what I know people to charge. Don't quote me on this. It might not be 100% accurate. Is it possible that you call places and hear more or less? Sure. But I'll tell you that the range that I'm seeing out there for private pay home care is approximately between $35 to upwards of $42 an hour. So just keep that in mind as you decide, how you are going to move forward with home care. And like I said, most agencies do operate on a private pay basis. We do work with long-term care insurance policies. Long-term care pays for home care. You will have to investigate and speak to your loved one about whether or not they do have a long-term care policy. Long-term care policies are often purchased way back, right? So someone who comes to me might have been paying into this premium policy for the last 30 years. So it's very possible that you maybe never heard them talk about it. Or maybe you've never seen a copy of the policy. Now you're thinking, oh, wait, I have seen some mail come to the house that looks like it's from a company that I'm not familiar with. Investigate what benefits you do have. And if there is anything like a long-term care insurance policy, long-term care is great, not only paying for home care, but also for assisted living. Backup care benefits. So we partner with a company called Bright Horizons. It's a backup care company that helps provide elder care. So a lot of employers have relationships with companies like Bright Horizons so that they can help keep you in the workplace by helping to subsidize the cost of in-home care. So I always encourage everyone, if you do work for, some type of company or corporation, check with your HR and see if there are any benefits to help pay for elder care. People use, like Bright Horizons for child care as well, but in our purpose, it would be for elder care. There are some organizations that have grants for home care. I know Alzheimer's New Jersey is one of them. I believe they offer like $1,000 respite grant. And of course, veterans benefits, Veterans Aid and Attendance does cover home care. There are a couple of companies out there to help facilitate that process, which can be a little bit long at times. Medicaid is another payment source for home care. A lot of agencies are private pay and a lot of them don't accept Medicaid, but that doesn't mean it's not possible to find one that does. Once you qualify for Medicaid, again, a whole long process. You can get a prescription from your doctor for home care services. And lastly, something new and exciting that is developed in the last year is called the GUIDE program. So this is actually about 72 hours of home care covered by Medicare. It was pushed through by the Alzheimer's Association. Actually, they did a lot of advocacy to try to get this because prior to a year ago, there really was not anything that you could get from Medicare to cover home care. So the GUIDE program is great. It's for people who have traditional Medicare and a dementia diagnosis or suspicions of dementia. And they are able to get about 72 hours or $2,500 of home care benefits. So getting to the end of the presentation, and then I will leave room for questions. But yeah, I mean, you always just want to set realistic expectations and having as much information as possible really helps you to be able to do that. So just remember, home care cannot replace family involvement or any type of medical care. It can't eliminate all risks or challenges, unfortunately. Do we see people's likelihood of falls decrease significantly with a home health aide? Absolutely. It really does bring down the risk, but as we know, life happens and things certainly can still occur. Home care can't guarantee personality matches. Care is a relationship that does develop over time. I always encourage everyone, this is a new, strange thing. Your mom's never had help in the home. She's never had anyone in there sitting with her, staring at her for the last 20 years. She's been alone eating her breakfast. And now she has someone sitting there eating breakfast with her, or maybe not even eating, just watching her while she eats. So yeah, it's a little funny at first, but you have to give time to settle into the process. Like I said, the relationship will build over time and your loved one will get used to having to help, especially when they see how beneficial it really can be. And of course, home care can't force your loved one to do what they don't want to do. So oftentimes we get families reaching out. I would love my mom to exercise more. Okay, so what happens when you ask your mom to exercise? She absolutely refuses. All she wants to do is sit on the couch and watch TV. Fine, valid. Maybe she's tired. Maybe she doesn't feel like getting up. But if you're not able to, we might not be able to either. And so just understand, this isn't a miracle. Our caregivers are humans too. They can only push your loved ones so far. You actually might be able to push farther than our caregivers. And so just keep that in mind. Sometimes as the relationship develops, we are able to get clients to do things that they might have been resistant to initially. But just know, I mean, it's not like having a family member in there who can give them the tough love. The caregivers definitely have to have a bit of a softer approach, or else they could get kicked out of the house. What can home care do? Home care can support independence, safety, and comfort at home. Home care can provide mental stimulation and help to establish daily routine. Home care can reduce family stress, temporarily or long term, and prevent family caregiver burnout. Home care can absolutely improve the quality of someone's life by keeping them safe, keeping them healthy, keeping them happy. And lastly, home care can add years to someone's life. Like I've said, we've seen the significant impact really having a really good caregiver can do. It can completely change someone when they're making sure that, all of their meals are being taken, all their meds are being taken, that they're showering and they look nice every day. So things like that might seem small actually make a really big difference, and it can certainly keep your loved one around for, longer than you expected. So I would love to take a pause. It's about 7:45. I'm happy to take some questions. I first also want to mention that the next installment of our Sandwich Generation series is on February 24th at 7 p.m. I know I mentioned in this presentation that home care is not for everyone. So Connie Pizarro of Oasis Senior Advisors is going to present about that transition to assisted living care in February. So she's going to put that link in the chat. Um, but yeah, thank you for listening. I would love to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was a lot of great information. I took some notes as well. Hmm. So some of the things, just to kind of recap, ADL, right? Like is it active daily living?
Activities of daily living, yes.
Activities of daily living. So some of the examples have been mentioned, sort of like when to know, or, this was one of the questions that came up when we did the in-person live, is like, when do we know, right? What are some of the things, the signs to look for to know that folks need help? And I think there were some examples of missing medicine, right? Maybe driving behavior, things like that. So something to keep in mind. And Megan mentioned POA, a power of attorney. Typically, that's given to some of the adult children, which kind of links back to the first session that we did on estate planning. So hopefully this will also be a reminder that if you yourself, the participants, or the parents, or aunties, uncles are taking care of, don't yet have this, this is really key to have in place. And estate planning is not only for the wealthy, right? It's literally a statement, a wish of, how we want things to be taken care of from health perspective and anything else that we may have. So if you don't have that, please, get that done. Ways to pay for it. The long-term care policy is an important one. And I love that you mentioned average hourly rate, just so people know, like, okay, if mom or dad, need X amount of help per week, they kind of have a rough idea of, right, like what that costs like. So all of that is great information. I'm curious what questions came up for you. I know that someone had questions about if you know of a agency in the Somerset County. I was able to look up that there is a right at home in Central Jersey. I'm wondering if you would have any other recommendations.
Yeah, so Right at Home is a national franchise. So if you do have any questions about identifying care in places that are not Essex County, so my agency, Right at Home of Essex County, obviously we cover this area. But if you do need another area covered in New Jersey or otherwise, you can certainly always reach out. I tend to know all of the owners of the different agencies in New Jersey as well, so I can certainly make a qualified recommendation. Yes, I do know the owners of the franchise that supports the Bridgewater area. I know them pretty well. They've been in business for a long time too. So I would certainly recommend reaching out to them for sure.
You know, one of the things that I wanted to mention that I see often is that when families start to look at the price of in-home care, sometimes they say, "Oh, that's too expensive," and they want to go the route of having an independent person or maybe someone from church or a family friend. And I want you to think about that because sometimes it might seem initially to be less expensive, but in the long run, you may end up hurting yourself, your loved one. And what I mean by that is in Maeghan's presentation, she mentioned how when you work with an agency, if something were to happen, the agency has that person insured. If you have the woman from your church or friend or someone and they slip and fall in your home, you're responsible. So you need to keep that in mind. Also, when you work with someone outside of an agency, a lot of times they want to be paid um, under the table. They don't want to pay taxes on that. And then that can cause you to have problems down the line when you're looking to get federal support, such as Medicaid, and you can't prove where that money went that you spent all that time on a caregiver because you don't have any receipts. So I just want to caution you when sometimes we see something that says, "Oh, I can find a cheaper way to do that." Um, there are consequences and repercussions for those cheaper ways, and that's want to make sure that you think through that whole scenario before taking the approach that initially may seem less expensive.
Thank you, Connie.
Yeah, those are really great, important questions. So someone asked, insights, I'd rather. Someone asked, they missed the first session. Is it available? So I've instructed them to email you, Megan, for the
Yeah.
recording.
Yep.
Um, is the recording on the slides from the first session? Okay, I just answer that. If you can email, is that the same person? If you can email Megan Zenti, if I'm saying it correctly, we can get through the recording.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Was this helpful?
Yes, very much so.
Extremely.
Thank you so much. Very informative.
Great. Great to hear. And I
Yes, thank
did,
you.
yeah, you're welcome. I did share the link for our upcoming event, so be sure to register and also share it out. This is really, great information, guys, that we're sort of breaking up and, giving to you bits and pieces that you can digest and also just take action. We're hoping that this is not going to be one of those things you log in and log off, but actually learn something and take some action with your family, whether it's making sure that you have an estate plan or starting to research agencies. Look, those were some great resources, Megan, that you shared about backup care. I didn't know that such a thing existed for elder care. So all of those things are great to share. All right, if there's no other questions, you can expect to get some follow-up from us about the session. Feel free to email us back and let us know what you think, or if you need additional resources around this, or state planning or placement or downsizing. You have the right team collective here, and if we need to pull in someone else into the team, we all have great quality professionals and resources, and we're happy to help. So Thank you for joining, and I hope you found this helpful. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.